Hello and welcome to the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Perrodin, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum here at Camp Shelby. And with me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, retired Navy Captain Bill Tody, former skipper of the Fast Tech submarine USS Indianapolis, Commodore of Submarine Squadron 3 in Pearl Harbor, and many other postings. How are you this fine February morning, Bill?
I'm doing well, Seth. With all the nicknames and masters there, Buck, Bucky, maybe you should start referring to me by my call sign at the academy. It was Taco. So if you want to
Taco.
call me Taco, that'll work. I'll answer to it.
I don't think I can do that, Bill.
No. And don't ask me if you say, why did they call you Taco? I won't be able to tell you. You don't get to make them up. Somebody else
Yeah.
makes them up for you. And
And
there you go.
I think if I remember correctly, when we were in Benicia, California, draining that bottle of Maker's Mark, if I remember correctly, you told me why, but I frankly don't exactly recall exactly all the details.
Yeah, it started out as Taco Bill, and then it just got shortened to Taco. But anyway,
There we go. There we
that's
go.
not what we're here to talk about today, Seth.
It is not. And we want to welcome the third member of our crew here, Tommy Lofton, who is the director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum and a fine historian and good buddy, great buddy, best buddy. How are you today, Tommy Lofton?
I am good. And I guess my call sign's Sweet Tea, so we can go with that.
It is. That is true. And there's a story behind there is a story behind that one too. And I
That
can
is
tell you
true.
that one, Bill.
Yeah,
Another episode for another day.
I don't have a nickname.
You don't.
I do
Well,
not.
we can change that.
I
I've
The only,
got one, but I can't
requirement-
say it.
The only requirement, Seth, is you have to not like it. If you like it, we got to change it. That's kind of one of the rules.
That is very true. That is very true. Well, just a little PSA for the next several weeks. If you already haven't guessed, we're going to be doing these reviews of Masters of the Air, in addition to our normal weekly podcast on the Pacific War, which has not stopped, by the way. So if you haven't, please tune into that show as well and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel as it helps other people find our show. Bill, I'm turning it over to you, my man.
Sounds good. So this episode, which we call, let's say, part 5, begins with Bucky sitting in a fort. He's in the, I think it was in the co-pilot seat, smoking and drinking inside the plane. Now, the rules for drinking is no drinking within 12 hours and no smoking within 50 feet. But of course, military pilots being who they are, they would always change the rule to no drinking within 50 feet and no smoking within 12 hours. Let that settle on you. Yeah, it's supposed to be funny. Well, he's drinking within 50 feet and within 12 hours. So he's violating them, whichever way you want to put it. So a Jeep pulls up. Guy jumps out of the Jeep. Hey, it's me, Kenny. Colonel Harding's looking for you. The weather report is supposed to clear up. So they get back to, the scene. And it's clear that he's there. So people are seeing him for the first time, guys. And they say, well, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be on leave, liberty, shore leave was what we call in the Navy in those days, in London. And he says, you got to know why I'm here. There can only be one reason I came back. And somebody says, what are we flying every day now?
Yeah.
So was there a period of time where they flew missions every day?
There was, in this particular time period that they're portraying here. This is October, well, it's October 10th, 1943, which is the third of technically 4 days of Black Week. 8th Air Force flew 8th, 9th, and 10th, and then again on the 14th of October, 1943, Bremen, Marienburg, Anklam, Munster, and then, of course, 2nd Schweinfurt. So, yeah, this was a uptick, shall we say, in activity for the 8th Air Force. Not that they didn't fly often, because they did, but this was a period of 3 days, boom, 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 3 big, hard missions in a row, and it's known collectively in history as Black Week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Blakely, they're talking about the fact that Blakely got his fort back to England. Cleven's plane, they talk about the fact that Cleven's plane took a direct hit and went down, and everybody thought he was invincible. They describe Bremen as the toughest mission of the war. And one of the crew members said, who got back, and he's one of these guys that, hey, there's only one tree on the airfield, and somehow we managed to hit it. But they got back to their field, and somebody who was presumed dead, he's worried. You didn't ship my locker already, did you? and he makes a snide remark about his storage of condoms that he didn't want his mother to find,
Right.
guys.
Right. Yeah, that was I like the way they did that. And they did it, I think if I remember correctly, in the episode previous too. Tommy, you might help me remember that, or you might recall
There
better
was
than I, but
another, yeah, there was another instance where they sort of referenced foot lockers and things getting cleaned out. Yeah.
yeah, and the way they did that I thought was really good. It was very accurate. You heard guys say all the time back in the day that, if they were to land on another base or put it down in the water, whatever the case may be, they didn't return home to their home base. They'd come home and they'd find all their stuff gone because base personnel wanted to get that stuff out of there for multiple reasons. A, to get people in there, and B, so the other guys that did survive in that Nissen hut weren't staring at your belongings, and it started to dwell on
Mhm.
their minds. So that was I thought that was very well done. Again, very, very accurate.
There's a few
Yeah.
occasions too where some of the guys said they came back, were sort of presumed dead, and found that some of the new guys or some of the old guys were even wearing some of their stuff,
Yeah.
or had kind of gone through their locker for them and figured, well, they're
Mhm.
dead. They don't need this anymore. Uh,
Yeah.
so these things did happen.
Yep. Now, this plane, Blakely's plane that landed at the wrong airfield, Crosby was the navigator on it. When they thought he was presumed missing, his friend, his best buddy Bubbles, wrote a letter to his wife and almost mailed it off. And they're going, it's not, you can't call it back. I mean, that would be devastating. The only thing you could do is try to phone her before the letter gets there. Happily, so it took weeks, sometimes over a month for mail to get through. So there would be some time. But this was like Crosby's greatest concern was making sure that nobody mailed a letter to his wife that he was missing.
Yeah, it that would have been a prickly situation, shall we say. And again, 100% accurate. Guys would
Mm,
try and there are many hundreds of thousands of instances in which, friends would try and intervene and let family or whatever, husbands, wives, brothers, and whatever, know that, hey, look, this is what happened to Johnny. He went down,
mm,
because the government's just going to say, lost, presumed missing, or lost, presumed killed, whatever the case may be, and he's going to say, this is what happened to your husband or your brother, and there were countless episodes of that happening in between family members and
right.
service personnel overseas.
At this point, I love the detail that they put into the storyline. Crews have a little bit of downtime. They're watching an Abbott and Costello movie.
Yeah.
You young guys, you can look that up. Um, then they cut to a scene in the operations center where they're assigning tail numbers to crews because remember, plane shot down. You got some crews. You're having to augment the crews. If you've lost a crew member or a gunner or something like that, got shot, injured, wounded, killed, you've got to augment, replace those lost crew members and assign tail numbers. So all the little details that are true to life that go on behind that. And of course, at this point, Crosby is informed that he's now the group navigator. He was a first lieutenant. He's promoted to captain. And it's like an instantaneous promotion. He pins on right away. I don't know how accurate that would be, but it's probably close to being right.
I don't know, Tommy. I mean, was he promoted to captain? Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Did it happen that quick like that? I guess. I
I'd,
really, honestly,
I'd
I
have to
couldn't
go
tell you.
back and read his book and study up on it. But I mean, those things did happen where you had, one rank, 1 minute, one another, even in the infantry level there, you get
Right.
battlefield promotions, things like that too. So it's not too far fetched, if it didn't happen that quickly or that instantaneously, if you will. But,
Mm.
but,
Yeah,
it's,
field
it's,
promotion.
yeah,
Field
yeah.
promotion, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
like
So
the
good.
I was gonna say, we bagged on the Crosby character in the beginning, for I think right reasons. But I like the way that they've progressed him now. He is the character that's on screen is more representative of the actual man. He was a very
Mm.
humble guy, a brainiac, incredibly highly intelligent, very well organized, and above all, very humble. And I think that is what's coming across now on the show.
Mhm.
And I think they're doing a very good job. The actor who's portraying, I did not know Crosby, 100% clarity. You know, I've read his book multiple times, and I knew guys who did know him, and they all said that he was a very humble and, you know, kind of a quiet guy, really. If
Mhm.
he'd crack a joke, it was like, oh, you know, it was one of them things like, oh, Crosby actually, you know, laid
Yeah,
one on the line there. But I like the way they're portraying him right now.
right. But believe it or not, all of this is the intro of the episode because at this point they have the title sequence and the music. And I'm going to say it, the music is starting to grow on me more. I was pretty hard on it initially there, Tommy, but you know, one of our commenters, our viewers said, I don't know, I've listened to it several times now. I think I like it better than Band of Brothers. I'm not there yet, but it is starting to grow on me.
Yeah, I think I said it a week, maybe 2 weeks ago that, a lot of those series, it took a little minute, a little bit to get into that music. And now when I hear it, I think back to the series or I hear it and think back to some veterans that remind me of that time period or of that service. And same is true for this. I think the music is, I was going to say the same thing. I'm starting to like the music. I'm actually have not been skipping through the intro just to hear it.
I haven't either.
Um, and
Yeah.
I'm enjoying it and the variations, which we can get into a little bit later, but even into the rest of this episode in some high intensity areas, they still use portions of that theme. I don't know if y'all noticed that, but there's uh I guess some similar versions of the theme in there where they even speed it up, make it a little bit louder, a little bit more edge of your seat, but it is starting
Yeah.
to resonate and I think do great things for the future of this series for sure.
I think the musical expression would be variations on a theme, but yeah, I've
There you
noticed
go.
that. All right. So now we're in the operations pre-mission briefing, and they reveal that the next target's going to be Munster. It's a railroad marshaling yard just east of the city center. And so accuracy is paramount. Here's the problem. They only have 17 airplanes, 17 ships left in the group. And so it's announced that Egan will be the command pilot in Brady's fort. And so this group is really starting to be decimated, guys.
Yeah, and I got two things I want to say. One, I want to talk about the target of Munster because that's a big deal, huge deal. But to address your point there, Bill, yeah, the 100th had taken a beating. You know, they weren't called the Bloody 100th for no reason. They'd lost, you know, I can't remember now, eight or nine, eight, I believe, to Bremen on the 8th or nine, and then they lost one or two to Marienburg the day before. So they're actually running out of ships. They're running out of planes. They've got the crews,
Mhm.
but they're running out of birds, and they're having to borrow birds from other groups, which is what happens. You know, the that was a common thing, and the 100th had to do that often. You know, in 1943, this wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last either. You know, that they had to do that kind of thing, and they weren't the only ones by any means. There were other groups that were doing the same thing that had suffered heavy casualties where other groups had not, and that was something that was unique to it's not unique to the air war, but it's unique to the air war over Europe. That you get these huge bomber formations of several hundred, and then later, you know, over 1,000 American aircraft. And if you were in one spot in a formation, you might not have even seen a German fighter at all during the whole mission. And you flew the same raid that the 100th Bomb Group flew, and your group didn't even fire a shot in anger, didn't lose any aircraft, and then the group that's several miles behind loses everybody but one. Um, so it's it was very much luck of the draw as to where you were in the
Mhm.
formation and as to what happened to you for that particular mission. Some guys, again, Second Schweinfurt, 60 bombers lost. The 100 bomb group didn't lose a single airplane. So it just depended on where you were.
Mhm. And you wanted to talk about Munster?
I do. And Tommy, we've talked about this for years since our days at World War II Museum. This particular mission marks a significant turning point in the Eighth Air Force's war against Germany. The Eighth Air Force had American Army Air Forces, but specifically the Eighth had pledged for years, all about precision bombing. And, we've already talked, you can't be precision bombing with the Norden because it just didn't work. But the point is, we prided ourselves on attacking industrial and military targets like ball bearing factories, Messerschmitt production factories, whatever the case may be, things like that. We didn't, or at least we like to say that we didn't attack city centers where other nations did. They did. The Germans did it. The British did it. You know, we did it too in Japan in 1945. But this is Europe 1943. That's what we're talking about here. This particular mission is a direct flip flop of that, mission statement, if you will, because what they did not say in this actual episode is that the actual aiming point for the Munster raid were the front steps of the Munster Cathedral. Yes, the railroad marshalling yards were right there by the cathedral, but the lead bombardiers were told to aim for the front steps of the Munster Cathedral, and the bombers were supposed to appear over the target at noon. What time did church let out on that Sunday? Noon.
Noon.
We were there to kill civilians and the German. Yes, we were there to kill the German railway workers. Absolutely. But women and children were going to get killed as well. And we knew that. And one thing that they kind of alluded to in the episode was that, there were some significant protestations by a lot of guys that were flying that day. Were like, I don't want to do this. This goes against what we were taught. This goes against what we're supposed to be doing. We're going to kill women and children. And there were some guys who refused to fly and who were actually they were threatened with courts martial. It's like, you're going to fly. This is our mission. You're going to do it. And there were guys that, had serious resignations about doing this. Johnny Egan was not one of those people. He was there. This is what they called his revenge raid. And he was there to do that very thing. But it marks a big significant shift in the 8th Air Force's way of fighting the war. And it's not the last time that this is going to happen, I assure you.
Yeah, but Tommy, they really downplay it in the episode. There is one guy that complains, aren't we
Frank
dropping
Murphy,
too
yeah.
close to the cathedral? And, and then he said, and Bucky says, this won't end until we hit him where it hurts. So in the episode, they play it like that wasn't the intention.
Yeah, it's as Seth said, it's a very big moment, and not just in the 100th Bomb Group, but in the 8th Air Force at this point for this mission, this type of mission. And yeah, they definitely alluded to it, but I felt like there could have been, especially when they're in the briefing room, from my memory of this, there were several guys who were vocal and verbal about it right then.
Mhm.
As soon as they
Yes.
announced the target Munster and announced the aiming point and everything else, and you had some in there who were basically clapping or were ecstatic at this point that we're taking it to the Germans. They've been losing a bunch of buddies. They're at this point in the war pretty tired of what's going on and want to hurt the Germans. And so you had a little bit of difference of opinion in there, but it was very clear everybody was going to have to fly the mission, or as Seth said, face a court martial or some type of punishment. And so there were guys who were getting aboard aircraft that were maybe hesitant to, but understanding they had to do it. And it is what it is. But that was again alluded to, but could have been maybe expressed even a little bit more strongly, I felt like, in that preparation sequence instead of when they were just, suiting up to get on the bird kind of thing. I feel like there was probably more people in that room who they could have had a little bit more upset about this mission based on the various accounts of men who were on that mission and have written about it since.
Yeah. I knew one guy named Colonel John Kima. You remember me talking about him? He was a bombardier in the 390th Bomb Group, which was in the 3rd Division, same division as the 100th. And when he heard about this, he, had massive resignations about doing this. He's like, this is not why I came here. I didn't come here to kill mothers and babies. And and when he was told that we are bombing the front steps of the cathedral, that's where you need to aim. He had some significant issues with this. And when I interviewed him at his home in California, he still had significant issues with that mission above all other ones. And he flew 30 missions, and he still remembered that one as, the one he had the most trouble with. So
And I'm surprised after I guess it was the last episode when they had the child in London and the home and the mother out there screaming. I'm kind of surprised they didn't make a little bit bigger deal about we're taking it back to the enemy the way that they've been bringing it to us or to our allies. Just something I thought of too while watching it.
They did underplay it. You know, there's two extremes you can do here. You could overplay the
Sure.
outrage, but in my opinion, they almost underplayed it. But it doesn't matter. Whatever they do, somebody's going to complain that they
Absolutely.
misrepresented the way it really went down. So I guess they did about as well as they can here.
And I
And the
mean,
next scene, go
well,
ahead. I'm
I,
sorry.
I was going to say, and to your point, I mean, not everybody did have resignations. There
Mhm.
were people that were like, yeah, okay, fine, yeah, let's do this. It's just another mission. There were other people that, like Tommy said, were happy about it.
Mhm.
And my point is it's not that not that they should have portrayed, boohoo and all this other stuff, but it's an important, and we're here to talk history too. I mean, yeah, we're
Mhm.
reviewing the show, but we're here to talk history too. And this is a major departure point for the Eighth Air Force. This is it,
Right.
this mission, and it's going to continue through the rest of the war. That's my major point. That's what I was trying to drive home with.
And as you said,
Mhm.
Seth, we were doing this to Japan,
Oh yeah,
44, 45, Tokyo firebombing, much bigger than the Dresden firebombing. So it happened. This is a sad fact of history, but it is history.
yep.
Okay, so now they're boarding the planes. Bucky jumps out of the Jeep and he trades his sheepskin jacket for a regular flying jacket. And he says, Buck never liked that jacket anyway. I guess that actually happened.
It did, and here's why I know this to be fact. Because I guess it was Thursday on the 100th Bomb Group's Facebook page. Colonel John Egan's grandson, I guess it was. Tommy, did you see that?
I didn't see it actually, no.
Had his friggin' A2 jacket that he wore on the Munster raid that he had for the remainder of the war, as spoiler alert here, as a prisoner of war. He had Egan's original A2 jacket, like standing there holding a picture of it. And I was like, that's
Wow.
freaking cool. And I didn't know that happened, but apparently it did.
No, that's incredible. Well, good on them for getting it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're taking it off. They're taking off. They're in the clouds over the channel, no masks, which indicates they're below 10,000 feet. And here's the one anachronism that I think I saw. I could be wrong. Let me say that up front. I think it could be wrong, but I think I saw a brushed aluminum navigation slide rule on the navigator's desk in Bucky's plane, which was the Royal Flush. It was a modern brushed aluminum flight computer, not a 1943 flight computer. It's the thing that you calculate the wind triangle and all that on. Anyway, forgive me
No
if I got it
idea.
wrong, but I caught it.
I would have to go back and look. I don't remember. I remember it sitting there, but I don't remember it being brushed aluminum. I just remember it being there when I think it was Bubbles or somebody sitting there doing calculations or something.
That's right. That's right. And the reason I caught it is because it's the same one I have in my bag that I used to use in the 1980s when I was flying. Anyway, it is what it is. I think I bought Jepsons or something like that. All right. So then they show
You know what they
Crosby
call that
eating.
now, right?
What is it?
It's called an artifact now.
Yeah, an artifact. Yeah, touche. All right. So Crosby's there eating breakfast, and there's a monologue about the waiting. And these missions lasted many hours.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I can imagine that the waiting. Now that Crosby is the group navigator and he's not going on this mission, that's got to be tough, guys.
Yeah, they called it sweating it out. It was
Mhm.
the term, and yeah, I mean, you're just sitting there. There's I don't want to say there's no radio communication because there is, but it's very very little, and generally it was the lead crew or command pilot or whatever would send a message back, like oh, we're getting hit with fighters or we got flak here. Or it was not a constant thing, so there wasn't much word coming back from the Raiders as to
Mhm.
what the heck was going on. So yeah, I mean there was very true. The guys are just sitting there literally sweating it out, going, I wonder what the heck is going on here because they had
Yeah,
little to no idea.
right. And they're already losing planes over the channel due to mechanical problems. And somebody says, how far back is the 390th? And the tail gunner says, he's got to be 5 miles behind us. The top turret. And here's another thing you guys are going to tell me, of course, Bill, didn't you know that? But the top turret gunner says to Bombardier, is it okay to pull the pins now? Now, I know that they have to pull the pins to arm the bombs, but I had always presumed that the Bombardier did that. No, the top
You
turret
know,
gunner does that?
I'll be honest with you. I don't know. I'll be honest, because I
Okay.
mean, I knew a couple bombardiers, like I just told you, John Kima and Joe Armanini, who
Mhm.
was in the 100th, and they did go back there, and they were the ones that armed the bombs. However,
Mhm.
every crew is different, and I mean, the top turret gunner, he's a top turret gunner flight engineer, so he would have been
Mhm.
very qualified to go back there and pull pins on on bombs. And whether that was every
Sure.
crew, I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't know.
And then the other little detail here is they're checking the guns. Of course, you got to make sure the guns are going to fire before you get an action. And oh, by the way, on the opposite side of that, they didn't show this, but just for everybody's edification, you check the guns clear before you land, right? Take the ammo out, fire whatever rounds are still in the chamber, make sure that the guns are clear before you land. But here they're still going in a battle. They're checking the guns, making sure they work, everything's good. And then the fighters, of course, are heading home because of the range issue. That'll change later. Um, but at this point, we don't have the long range fighters yet. Of course, black starts. We're getting used to this choreography now. One fort is hit. Loros, I see shoots. Stymie's going down. 3 minutes to the IP. You guys want to talk about what the IP is?
The IP is the initial point, is what it stands
Mhm.
for, and that's essentially when, excuse me, when the B-17s or the bombers can no longer take, or they're not supposed to take evasive action because they're on the initial point, they're on the run towards the actual target, and they need to get as cohesively close and organized as they possibly can, because with the Norden bomb sight and the B-17 and the B-24 and later B-29s or whatever the aircraft that had the Norden in it, um, the bombardier actually flew the airplane when they were on the bomb run. The pilot would turn, and we see this in several of these episodes where the pilot is
Mhm.
basically like, it's your aircraft, whoever the bombardier is, Bill, it's your aircraft, and you are
Mhm.
flying the airplane through the bomb site, which is pretty cool for 1943 technology if you really think about it. And that's on the bomb run after the initial point. So when you get to the IP, it's you're all business, because it's about to get real.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to
Now,
fly straight into the aim point. You go to the initial point, then you turn to your approach course. By the way, we do the same thing with Tomahawk missiles today. We program an IP into the missile so that it's not flying a straight line into the target. Easier to shoot down if you did do that. Tommy, were you going to say
well,
something?
yeah, I was just going to say that it was nice to actually see a fighter escort too, because
Yes.
it's gone through so many episodes where it's sort of referenced, but you never actually see them, and even here it's kind of a blur. But it was nice to see the P-47s out flying, and a reference to uh, a visual reference to fighter escort, which hopefully we will see more and more of as the series progresses.
I'm sure we will. Then some of the flak shrapnel hits the plane, and Harry's hit. He's one of the, I think, a waist gunner, and
Yeah.
basically it's a pretty gruesome scene as the side of his face is blown off. They say Clanton's dead, and so they're getting into the stuff at this point. Engine one quits, and feather it. They're over the IP. They're turning to course 057. Flak is slowing down, which can only mean one thing, guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Fighters are coming. And
Mhm.
it's important to note, and I think they did a fantastic job of this. I when the bombardier looks up from his Norden bomb sight, because they're on the run now, and he looks up and he sees just this cloud of contrails coming at him, which of course are German fighters. And I
Mhm.
don't remember the exact numbers of fighters that hit the 100th over Munster anymore. Tommy, maybe you do. I don't. But regardless of this, at this stage on October 10th, 1943, and I know people say they were more fighters elsewhere. I'm talking about the 100th Bomb Group right now. This was the most fighters, the most German fighters that they had seen to this point in the war. It was the largest concentration of enemy fighters over a target that had been experienced by the 3rd Bomb Division. Even Regensburg, they were picked at Regensburg, the whole way in, well, most of the way in. Or at Munster, it was just, and they were on them, like white on rice. They were all over them, and it was a heavy concentration of fighters. And I think the way that they showed that was just flawless. I really do. It was very well done.
Well, and before they even got to the fighters, I like that they continue to show you too, not just the pilot and co-pilot, but you see the other crew members, the tail gunner, the ball turret gunner. We've seen the ball turret in other episodes. We've even seen a ball turret death, which I don't think the individual they portray actually died in the ball turret, but that's another conversation. But the representation, you see a guy get in there, of course he pees into a condom and throws his own bomb out the window there for humor, in a sense. Drank too much coffee, I think he says. But that whole climbing in, suiting up, getting ready, the fact that they can see all this flak, and then the other positions communicating where they're starting to see this just massive formation of fighters come in, and trying to engage the enemy as best and as quickly as possible is pretty powerful in this episode. I feel like this was overall too a much more edge of your seat episode than any that we've seen previous, which is hard to believe because we've seen some pretty good stuff up to now. But yeah, that initial pass and seeing those fighters come in was a little hairy.
It was, and we're just getting started here. The ball turret gunners gets hit in the leg after one of the waist gunners is killed. Pilot, pilot a bombardier, your ship. So, as you said, the bombardier is flying the airplane through the Norden gun sight. The number 3 engines on fire. 1 minute to bomb release. Then rockets at 2 o'clock. Now engine 4 is gone, which means you're down to one engine. You can't fly the plane on one engine. So Bucky says, anyway, salvo the bombs, and he hits the bailout bell, guys.
Yeah, I mean, there were instances of B-17s coming back on one engine. However, it didn't come back very far. You're not flying back from Munster on one engine. That's not going to happen. Not going to happen. And I mean, that just shows you. I forget what the numbers were at that time, how many the 100th had lost, but I mean, they were getting chopped up there, and they were taking an absolute beating up there. And Bill, you mentioned it in passing just a minute ago, but or maybe it was Tommy, that the 390th was 5 miles behind the 100th. That means that the 100th Bomb Group is exposed, and they're exposed to German fighters, and they're exposed even to the flak gunners down on the ground, because they can see, that, there's a separate group of aircraft here. Let's shoot these guys. And that's exactly what's going on here. It was anytime there was a bomb group or squadron or whatever, or a singular individual aircraft that was alone or separated from the pack, they're going to get taken down. They're going to get taken down every time.
Yep. Now, there's an incredible sequence of shots that starts at this point. And folks, if you haven't watched this, man, it is edge of your seat, the way Tommy said. So they salvo the bombs, hit the bailout bell. Egan's, somebody reports Egan's leaving formation because he's on the one engine. He's starting to lose altitude. They're preparing to bail. As one of the crew members jumps, his harness gets hung up. I think his name was, they call him Ham Bone. And so he frees himself. They're all out of the airplane, and there's an incredible series of shots with them parachuting. So they're free falling. There is a little bit of a dispute with Bucky and his pilot saying, I'm the senior officer, you go. No, it's my airplane, you go. They jump together kind of. And they're being shot at as they're in free fall, as their fort's going down. I think we've seen that kind of thing happen in other movies. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Did it happen as much in the skies over Europe as it did in the Pacific? No, it did not. But it did happen. I mean, it was definitely a thing. And that story about Egan and Everett Blakely, was it Blakely? I think it was Blakely.
Yeah, I think it was.
Well, anyway, Brady. I'm sorry, Brady. And they're
Brady,
standing
Brady, yeah.
and yeah, Blakely was Crosby's father. My bad. It was John Brady and Johnny Egan. And they're standing there and they're arguing as to which one's gonna jump first. That apparently is a legitimate, like actual true story. And Egan said after the war that they were standing there arguing as to who the hell's gonna go out of the bomb bay first. And he saw a string of machine gun bullets go brrr, and like stitch the side of the fuselage. And he looked at it and he says, "I'll be seeing you." And he just jumped right out of here.
Who can blame
So
him?
yeah,
I
that
Yeah.
did
thought
happen.
that whole portrayal too, once you follow those guys out of the aircraft and they're free falling, because you don't want to just pull your parachute instantly.
No.
That whole sequence in there and then pulling the chute and then of course the German
Yeah.
fighter passing by. I mean, that happened. Yes, we did the same thing, believe it or not, whether people want to agree with that or not, it happened on all sides. But that whole sequence of him and just the sheer terror of jumping out of an airplane. That's not
Mhm.
something that they didn't get a lot of instruction on how to do that. I mean, they're not paratroopers. They're not going through jump towers and spending day after day learning to properly jump out of a aircraft. No, that whole thing is hard enough to imagine or to go through yourself, but also from a Hollywood standpoint to portray it and do it in such a way it doesn't look cheesy
Yeah.
or overly CGI'd or whatever else. I thought they did a phenomenal job showing that whole
Guys, I
bailout
don't,
procedure and everything.
yeah, I don't think this was CGI at all. I think they really had a guy
No.
jump out in a period parachute and they were filming him as he was free falling. That was like a real dude. So yeah, folks, it was not
Yeah.
cheesy because
It
there
was
was a
it
real guy.
was it was
Yeah,
powerful. I mean, you really could
was.
see the sheer terror involves, yeah, you think you're safe because you're out of this aircraft that could blow up at any point or whatever, but you still got a long way to go to get to the ground. And then as you see in there, even once he hits the ground, you got to worry about who saw you land and what to do next to try to survive.
Well, great segue because Bucky ends up on the ground successfully, and he's gathering his chute to hide it because obviously it's a big white "I'm here" marker for anybody who's overhead. So you want to make sure you hide that. And he's hiding it in like a hayfield. And the super says Westphalia, Germany is where he lands. And yeah, so then they jump back to the formation. But do you have anything you want to say about that before we go back to the formation?
No, I mean it's
No.
it's
Okay.
unlike that other bailout scene that we saw. Which episode was it? I don't remember. The Regensburg raid, I think.
Two, maybe?
Yeah, whatever. Where the young man is, found by the Belgians. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
These
Mhm.
guys are in Germany, so there's the
Yeah,
civilians
they're
that
in
are on the
Germany.
ground. They don't want you
Yeah.
here. They're not friendly. They are not going to
No,
help you.
And guess what,
So
especially
guys?
when
After you bomb their cathedral and
exactly.
everything else, this war's about to get a whole lot worse when it
yes,
comes to
indeed.
having to land in Germany and face civilians. So,
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
So now we're back in the air with let's say the second plane in the formation, and the bombardier says, "We're there, we're there. Can I drop?" And the pilot's saying, "Not until the lead drops. Now, not yet. Now, not yet." And then he sees the lead drop and he says, "Okay, go." And then they declare right on target. And of course, flak again, somebody's leg hit. De Blasio's leg gets hit. He's bleeding like crazy. And he puts a tourniquet on his own leg. Flak stops, keep alert. There's somebody's humming, nervously humming,
That's the
because they
pilot.
know
Yeah.
that,
yeah, that's the
yeah,
pilot.
they know who's coming in, guys.
So this is not our first introduction to him, but it's the first introduction we see of him in combat. And of course, the him that I'm referring to is the one and only, the legend, Robert Rosie Rosenthal. This was Rosie's third mission. And he, by all account, and I know his Tommy, you know him too, Dan Rosenthal. Dan, if you're watching, hello, Dan. And Dan is a fantastic human being. Dan is Rosie's son. Um, but from all accounts, that was Rosie. He was like he's a very likable guy, very kind of calm, cool, and collected at all times. And, utter precision, utter professional, utter businessman in the air, utter leader too. when he's humming, he's not humming out of nervousness. He's humming to try and calm other people down. And you can see the effect that it has on the guys in the airplane. They're like, what in the hell is this guy doing? And then they realize, oh, no, it's okay. It's cool. And it's kind of like, humming to a baby when you're trying to get him to go to sleep. It's the same kind of thing. And Rosie was just the consummate leader. We talk about consummate leaders all the time, Nimitz and Spruance and people like that. He was of that same cloth, frankly, honestly. He was born to do what he was there to do.
Other guys start to kind of join in and hum and sing along too, as they
And that was the point.
sort of realize what's going on. I think it's an Artie Shaw song, if I remember correctly, but it's a great scene of just all this sheer terror, everything that's been happening, and it's a great segue into his character, which I know we'll see more of as the series continues for sure.
Yeah, I was wondering where that was going, since we're losing all of the lead actors from the first few episodes. All right, so rockets coming in, the lead aircraft is going down. They've got a hole in their wing, and then an incredible visual spectacle occurs here. I'm reinforcing the point you made earlier, Tommy, that this was at least the most visually stunning of any of the episodes we've seen before, and the most edge of your seat, because what happens is they show two planes colliding, and I remember seeing actual vintage combat footage of a similar group of two planes colliding, and then they show pieces of a fort cascading, pirouetting down slowly over the channel. Now, they're not over the channel yet, but again, these little, because obviously they're not going forward as much as they're falling, but there's not a lot of weight to them. There are pieces of wing, pieces of fuselage, and it's almost like one of those oak tree seed pods spinning as it's going down. It just almost looks like in slow motion. Maybe they slowed it down a little too much, but visually it was a terrific effect, guys.
Yeah, I had a little issue with some of the CGI in there. I felt like it was a little too slow, and the wings were too stable. You have propellers and engine parts flying that they aren't spinning. I mean, to me, it's like, if you're going to go that far with it, go a little bit further. And if you look back at some of the footage where you see wings and other things coming off, think of like an oak leaf or something falling off of a tree during the fall. I mean, it's not going to fall just completely like this all the way to the ground. It's going to have motion to it, even if it's not sudden. But most everything, if you go back and kind of watch it, it's very static and how it falls. But the point that they're trying to make with those aircraft pieces, I think is well done. And Seth and I both have met and interviewed even fighter pilots who talk about aircraft pieces and parts flying around them, or engines dropping through their own their own aircraft and things like that, where they have to worry about not just seeing their buddies and the bullets and the bombs and the flak and everything else, but you're also having to worry about other parts of other fortresses, in this instance, coming through and taking you down as well.
I thought the whole sequence was well done. I wasn't really concerned about the movement or anything.
The physics of the falling.
I like the fact that they showed that, because no other movie or show or whatever has showed that, and that happened. I mean, when these planes go kaboom, they don't just vaporize. I mean, admittedly, sometimes that did happen if they were still full. And by full, I mean, with their bombs, they did literally just, and there was nothing there. But more often than not, even if they don't go kaboom, pieces are flying off all over the place. There's combat footage from the German side of, gun cam footage of these aircraft shooting up 17s and 24s. And I mean, you see chunks of them flying past the German fighters. So, I mean, it's real. I thought the way they did that, it was a nice little accuracy touch. I thought it was really well done.
Overall, it was really good.
I agree. If nothing else, it was extremely entertaining without. Yeah, look, I'm a physics undergrad. I'm into the mechanics as well, but mechanical physics. I didn't have a problem with it because I thought it was visually so stunning.
Well,
now,
admittedly, physics was my worst subject in high school. So
fair enough. And somebody's going to complain, do a numerical model of those falling pieces and tell us how they got it wrong. Anyway,
Sure.
so now there is one airplane left as they're returning to England. I assume this is Rosenthal's.
It's Rosie. Yeah. Yeah. It's Rosie.
Yeah. So, and they're saying, where is everybody? And they look around. I don't see any other ships from the 100th. Anybody see any? Not negative. So bogeys at 5 o'clock. So it's one fort, one B-17, and the bogeys are inbound. And, so what they do is, and my goodness, if this really happened,
And
it's
did.
amazing, guys.
It did.
But what he does is he starts spiraling down his one airplane so that he can uncover his guns. And it's almost like he's getting in a dogfight with the fighters, the way he's maneuvering the airplane, the way you would maneuver a warship to uncover your guns. And so that was an incredible scene. Did that really happen?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It certainly did. And, I was talking with my buddy Sean Bergstrom over the weekend, and he was remarking that his girlfriend had said, why did they do this? And, or why did he do this? And Sean put it perfectly. He's like, there's no formation left anymore. There's no formation flying. And he was 100% right. And that, you're a one-man band now, brother. You got to do whatever you got to do to get your people back home. And you are flying a flying fortress, and it's called a flying fortress for a reason. The thing is studded with machine guns. Let's unveil whatever I can to keep these krauts off of me. And I can't say kraut, by the way, because I am a kraut, so ease back. But it's true.
I'm sure you'll get comments about it.
No doubt. But regardless of this, what he did in the show is what he did in reality. And I saw that Dan Rosenthal, his son, said, yeah, that my dad did that, but it was actually significantly even more violent. And by that, I mean, like, Rosie's maneuvers were significantly more violent than what they actually showed in the show, because he was flying his pants off, literally. Trying to keep
you don't want
to,
in this scenario, flying straight and level is a suicide. I mean, there's no sense if you're the lone ranger out there in the sense, and all the aircraft are trying to do is shoot you out of the sky. The last thing you want to do is stay still. And so, guns aside, even you're trying to maneuver and move as much as possible to throw the fighters off. But like Seth said too, I mean, you're flying in a flying fortress, as it's dubbed, for a reason. Make it where every dadgum machine gun and every round has a chance in knocking your enemy out of the sky, and doing it as quickly as possible so you can get home or get to fighter cover, hopefully, or potentially. And I felt like they did a beautiful job in this sequence. I've always been a huge fan of Rosie Rosenthal, but to actually see that portrayed and everything else, I just remember, the first time, especially I watched it twice, but first time watching through, I was just, literally on the edge of my seat and just like, yeah, go, just cheering him on, and knowing what the outcome would be. Even it was unlike, I think, anything we've seen in any other B-17 film ever made, or bomber film from World War II. Now, I'm sure someone will come up with something obscure, made in 1949 or something, but as far as mainstream identifiable films when it comes to the air war, I felt like this was really, really cool.
Yeah, agreed.
The reason you hold a course in formation is so you don't fly into the planes on your right and left. There are no planes on your right and left, so you can jink to your heart's content, and that's what he's doing here. That's fantastic. So then they cut to the ground, and you've got Crosby and the colonel, and they're looking. A plane lands, and somebody says, that's not one of ours. That's from the 390th. And the colonel says, somebody says, where are our boys, Chick? And somebody comments, none of them made it. Oh, here comes another one. Oh, that's one of ours. And Rosenthal says, that's one of the new guys. That's Rosenthal, one of the new guys. Your point, it's Rosie. And he lands, and this is, again, very realistic. If you don't have 14 planes landing after you, the airport is yours. So he taxis across the grass, he taxis across runways, he does whatever he needs to do to get to where he can drop off the wounded that he has on board. He's all shot up. And of course, when they jump out of the airplane, somebody's throwing up. Rosenthal looks around, and of course, then the questions begin about all the planes that have been lost.
Yeah, Yeah, and again, by all accounts, that's 100% accurate. Both of his waist gunners were wounded. Both of Rosie's waist gunners were wounded. I forget which gentleman it was that did get out and barf all over the tarmac, but again, that's 100% true.
Mhm.
And then they go into interrogation and they start asking them, what happened to tail number 1, 2, 3, 4, shack
No
rat
record.
or whatever, and yet no record because they don't know. I mean, they may have seen
Mhm.
one or two go down, and they do say that, but I mean, they're fighting for their lives right here. At this point in the war, this was the nastiest raid that the 100th that they ever experienced, eclipsing Regensburg by far. And
Mhm.
this was a significant thing. I told my buddy over the weekend when we were talking about it, I said, this is the 8th Air Force raid that nobody knows about because everybody
Mhm.
talks about Schweinfurt Regensburg, second Schweinfurt Berlin. This is the heartbreak that nobody knows about is the Munster raid
Yeah,
right here.
that's well put. I hadn't even thought about it that way, but you're 100% right. This is the one that nobody knows about, in the sequence too, where they're showing the interview process afterwards. It's hard to sit there and sure they saw some shoots from some aircraft, and they usually try to keep a log, especially the navigator, as we've seen in
Sure.
other episodes. But it's hard to do that when literally everybody's fighting for their lives, and there's so much happening in this mission that it's hard to keep up with what
Mhm.
aircraft and how many shoots from each one and all that other kind of stuff. And if you didn't write it down, you don't want to just guess.
Right.
And you see a few instances where they did get the chance to make notation and they reference that while they're sitting there in the room, being interrogated. But to me, I like the way that they showed that AAR after the mission and having just the realization, especially by the command team that were standing there, sitting there and hearing the results of this and realizing it's not that we had any
Yep.
birds come back and land at a different airfield because they couldn't make it here. There is nobody coming back except for the guys that are here in front of me. And that's uh, I would imagine in the shoes of the leadership standing there, that's a hard pill to swallow, realizing you've still got to continue your mission and have other fortresses up in the air, and you don't have that many left to even put up in the air, much less men to put in them.
Right.
Mhm. And to hammer the point home, they left with 17 airplanes, one returned. And in the debrief, in the after action report, as you said, Tommy, they're inquiring about every one of them. So 17 times you hear no record, 16
I
times,
think,
no record,
and I may be
no
wrong, but
record.
I think in actuality, I think one did turn back from mechanical issues.
Several
Okay.
Uh,
did. Several did.
Several,
No one.
okay,
Yeah, I was going to say
Several
that
did.
they actually lost 11 um,
okay.
Okay.
to Munster because there were 4 or 5 that turned around due to mechanical issues. So yeah.
Mhm. And then Bubbles airplane, they say no record. And somebody says, oh, no, I saw them. They were on fire and then they just blew up. And
I'm
somebody
chomping
asked,
at the bit.
Yep, me
yeah,
too. Me
So
too.
by the way, Bubbles, there's no record that he flew this mission and he
He
didn't
did not.
die over Munster. And we won't talk about what happened to him yet, unless y'all just want to spoil it. But heck, I'll just spoil it.
well,
Spoiler
that's a
alert if you don't want
major
to hear
point.
it.
That's a major point, guys, because at the close of this episode, they very poignantly show Crosby packing up Bubbles' stuff and pulling out that Dear Gene letter
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
Bubbles wrote when he thought Crosby was lost.
See, here's
And
what I have an
Crosby
issue
read.
with.
Go
I
ahead.
get the Hollywood, the relationship you're wanting to build there, the difficulty in losing your best buddy. I
Sure.
get wanting to do that. Do it with a composite character. I'm sorry. I have a little bit of a gripe in taking a real actual person and especially knowing they have family members or something potentially still around, killing them off on a raid they never went on or in a manner that didn't happen. And it's done a few times or the story's changed already up to this point, but this is pretty blatant to take someone who's
Yes.
not even on this mission and should I spoil it? Okay, what the
Yes.
heck? He dies a few
Why not?
months later. He dies in April 1944. He's buried
April
in Normandy.
28th. Yep.
Yeah, nowhere near this raid. Uh, to me, again, you do that with a composite character. You can be a little bit forgiving, like at the end of the Pacific when they kill off John Basilone. Sorry if you haven't watched the Pacific, but Basilone dies. Doesn't exactly die the way he did in real life necessarily, but there's a
Good
little
in
bit
that
of,
battle.
little grace in that because he was at least in the right battle. But
Mhm.
to me, I don't understand, and I get it from a writing standpoint and from a Hollywood director standpoint and trying to make an emotional impact. To me, this episode was already emotionally impactful when there's only one fortress that comes back anyway. Um, but I don't understand why you would take an individual like this and then just completely fabricate how they died, when they died, and do it and knowing that there may be some people who are still around that remember this individual or love this individual that's a little bit frustrated. It's kind of like Blythe in Band of Brothers too. They're still trying to deal with historically with Blythe's actual history. Anyway, sorry to kind of get on a soapbox and rant a little bit about it, but that bothers me.
I actually wrote the date down on my hand right at the beginning of this episode so I wouldn't forget it. April 28th, 1944 is when Bubbles Payne was killed in action. And I've dedicated my entire life's work is to preserving the memory of these guys. And that pissed me off. What was, in my opinion, the best episode of this series so far. I watched that at the end and I'm like, why did you do that? You've got an entire bomb group worth of, heartbreaking stories that you could pinpoint here. Why do you take a guy that didn't even fly the friggin' mission? Number one. And number two, God bless his soul, was killed in action 6 months later. Why did you do that? I don't understand the point in that. I get it, Tommy. Maybe, I agree with you. It's Hollywoodizing it or whatever. Don't do that with real people. This is how
somebody shed a tear.
Before.
Have Rosenthal and his men sit outside and watch the sunset and shed a tear or something like that. But to me, and reading the letter and doing all that, it just sort of cheapened the real Bubbles,
exactly,
and used him in a way to try to hit home some emotional, heart tugging thing that didn't necessarily have to happen because the whole dadgum episode is already hard enough on your heart to get through.
I mean, the Curtis Biddick thing in the first couple episodes irritated me. This made me mad because it's like, at least you could say, well, Biddick kind of did this or kind of did that. Payne didn't do this at all. He wasn't even there. He wasn't even on that raid at all.
Yeah, Biddick at least died in the right raid.
Right. And then too, to show like, again, Bill, you said it. People get, unfortunately, people get 95% of their history lessons from TV. And now there are people across this country that think that Bubbles Payne was killed on the Munster raid and that Harry Crosby sat there and cried over a letter that he wrote to his wife. And while that probably did happen in April 1944, it did not happen now. And there are going to be people that says, well, that's not important. The hell it isn't. It is too important. Because if you don't tell it accurate, then you shouldn't tell it at all.
100% agree with you guys. I'll give them some grace. And I'm pretty sure that they went to Bubbles' family and said, we want to put him in this episode. So we're going to change history to put him in this episode. Will you be okay with that? I'm pretty sure they would have gone to the family and made sure they were okay with that.
You would hope.
Fine. But the rest of all of humanity gets the history wrong. And that's the problem. I think all three of us have we have a problem with. All right.
Totally.
I mean, there's already so much loss. It's not, to me, it was unnecessary because there's so much loss already up to this episode. In this episode, I would have just said, leave it alone. You could mention it later. You could feature it in a later episode. Maybe they're not going to, that time period in the future. I don't know. But to me, his loss is definitely there and will have an effect on Crosby no matter when it happens, but put it in the right place. Make this episode to me more about the fact that you just finished showing no other aircraft. Of course, you talked about the 390th, and that did happen as well. But the idea that you just had one bomber come back, play that up more if you're going to play up anything. Don't cut and end the episode on a death that didn't happen when it happened, in real life, if you will. I just that kind of stuff gets a little hairy as a historian and trying to cut through some of the realities of what happens and who's killed when.
Yep.
I hear the producers whispering into my ear, it's a movie, not a documentary. I hate that. I hate that.
No excuse.
I'm 100% on board with that. When you have to deviate for dramatic reasons, they didn't have to do that here. Yeah. There was plenty of drama without screwing with the history. All right, guys. So let's wrap it up. What do you think of the episode? Tommy?
I'll go first, I guess. I thought it was great. It was probably my favorite up to this point. The intensity was, I mean, through the roof. It was amazing. I expected, knowing the raid and knowing what was coming, that this was going to be a powerful episode. I did not imagine it to be as good as they portrayed it. I thought they did a great job on that, bubbles aside. The combat actions, I'm sure some people are going to gripe about the slow motion with the
I
German
liked it.
aircraft, and I liked it. I thought it was,
Kitchen eyes, yeah.
added a little bit
I
to the
did too.
drama, if you will, and you do have pilots who talk about seeing each other's eyes or close enough to see each other's faces, that kind of stuff. I thought it was cool. I liked the whole sequence and the full or true Rosie introduction there with Rosenthal. I was glad to see him not just as a character, but actually doing something that he was known for, and showing him as the great man that he was. So I overall I loved it.
Yeah, I
Okay.
agree. I agree 100%. This was by far my favorite episode. Bubbles, pain, fiction aside, this was I was looking forward to this one, and that sounds macabre, but I was looking forward to this one because I know this raid very well. And I went back and grabbed this off my shelf. There's a book here. I don't know if you can see it, by Ian Hawkins,
We can
called The
see it.
Munster Raid, Bloody Skies
Yep.
Over Germany. I have no earthly clue if this thing's in print. This copy is
I think
34
it's
years
hard to
old.
get now. It's pretty hard to get now, I think, but it's a great book to get.
If you can find it, get it and read it, because it's not just obviously the 100th that covers the entire raid, but it focuses heavily on the 3rd Bomb Division because those are the guys that took a beating. And it goes into the nuts and bolts from the German side, the American side, into the briefing huts, all that stuff. Very good book if you can find it. Ian Hawkins, Munster Raid, Bloody Skies Over Germany. If you can find it, grab it. But I think this episode was by far my favorite of the series so far, Bubbles excluded.
Yeah. So there's all three of us. I don't know if this is stereotyping or not. Being guys, like this episode the best because of the action. Those of you who are driven by characters are not liking the fact that all the leads are dead now. Not dead. All the leads are gone now. All these characters we've come to really get attached to in the first 5 episodes of the miniseries. Not one of them are flying anymore. Now they're going to introduce new ones. So if you're a character-driven person, you may not think this was the best episode, but being an action-driven person, I agree with the two of you. It was the best episode.
But I mean, again, that's reality for the 100th Bomb Group. Most of the new, not all of them, but most of the old guys were gone by this point.
Yep.
Yeah. Here today,
Good.
gone tomorrow.
That's exactly
As it is. Okay, Seth, back to you.
All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you very much for listening and or watching this episode of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. If you have questions or comments, and I'm sure you will, please send us an email at unauthorizedpacificpodcast@gmail.com. If you haven't, please do like and subscribe to our channel, as it helps other people find our stuff. Tune in next week when we go on to part 6. This was 5. Yeah, so part 6 of Masters of the Air. And as always, tune into our regular show every week about the Pacific War. So once again, my name is Seth Paradon. I want to thank you very much for listening and or watching. Tommy, thank you very much for being here again this week. We greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Bill, take us home.
See you again twice next week.